Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It's Proclamation News and Governance. Welcome. Investigating the Social World 2. Module DD 103. Been going through supporting the show time and time. Yeah, I'm reading this for other students as well, other students that can't read, so I'm trying to help out not just myself, other students. I'm not a selfish person. Some students, might be able to read, so they can just sit there and listen. So, Chapter 8, Border, Criminologies and Crimmigration. Page 252. Once an asylum seeker is identified, they are issued with an asylum seeker's identity card, become subject to detention, dispersal and electronic tagging, barred from access to paid work, and have limited, if any, access to education, healthcare, support. For the asylum seeker, the first and most critical stage in this process is being identified as an asylum seeker. Some of the key issues that can affect asylum claims. The first and most critical stage process being identified as asylum seekers. Some of the key issues that can affect asylum claims and that can impact on their lives of people seeking asylum in the UK include policy changes such as the new Asylum Model 2007 and Fast Track. The new Asylum Model was introduced with the key aim being to speed up asylum decisions, thus accepting, rejecting or returning applicants based on their claims. It was also to ensure that the same case owner would follow the whole application and thus know the application well enough to present a fully informed case. Although it initially set out to reduce the time people spent in the system, In reality, it has meant complex cases has not given enough time for due investigation. For example, Stonewall, a UK-based lesbian, gay and bisexual charity, found that people applying for asylum under humanitarian grounds based on sexual orientation prosecution were often given very little time to develop their claims. Stonewall 2010. B. Welfare. Although asylum seekers do receive some benefits while awaiting a decision, this amounts to very little financial support and leaves some people living below the poverty line. Since applicants do not have the right to employment, they generally have no alternative but to depend on welfare allowances. Merits and credibility. To be granted asylum, it is up to the applicants to prove they have well-founded fear of being persecuted in their country of origin for reason of race, religion, nationality, membership of a particular social group, or political opinion. A number of problems arise in this process. Firstly, country of origin. Information's file can be out of date or inaccurate. Secondly, interviews may not be sensitively carried out, as will be discussed in section 2.4. Thirdly, not all abuses can be easily evidenced. Finally, sexual violence and silent forms of torture, which are used purposely to leave no evidence. It might leave any physical scars. Why UK wants to reopen schools concerning the variant virus? I have no idea. I don't know why they are opening schools. It's probably more to do with keeping the democracy happy, if I'm totally honest. giving mothers their respite from their children so they go to work, keep their households, keep domestic abuse down for children. I think that's probably more to the case while they keep trying to get kids at school. Leave any physical scars, but that does not mean it has not occurred. Cuts to legal aid. That's why cuts in legal aid, which offers state-supported legal representation to people who have little funds themselves. They have meant that fewer people seeking asylum can be given representation. Do the issues raised in the section challenge any ideas or assumptions you previously held about seeking asylum in the UK? Take a few minutes to reflect on your own ideas on immigration in the light of this material. Often, the knowledge or insight people have about seeking asylum is heavily informed by the media. This regularly focuses on welfare claimants, crime and or the blurring between asylum and immigration statistics more generally. It is very seldom that the reality of seeking asylum is represented accurately and in an unbiased way, especially in relation to the process of the application and decision making, or problem of destitution for many asylum seekers. I think the trying to seek asylum is a bit more, not impossible, but trying to seek asylum is a bit harder. You need a good case to come over to, find work or whatever because of Brexit. Which is a fair show, isn't it? I mean, if you come there not to just live off the state, population growth, we've got to make accountability for everyone. Sounds unfair, but it's the rules in most countries, to be honest with you. 2.4, gaps in responding to gendered violence. One key issue for feminist activists and criminologists alike has been the treatment of women seeking asylum in the UK, as well as other parts of the world. Research shows that women and men who seek asylum often do so for different reasons, for example, during conflict or political unrest. Men may more commonly be politically targeted for systematic abuse by state actors. In these kinds of circumstances, men may claim asylum based on factors such as torture by the state, cruel or inhumane treatment, or because of their political affiliation. While many women are targeted for similar abuses, women and girls are disproportionately affected by sexual abuse, rape, domestic abuse, and other violent acts often attributed to gendered cultural practices such as female genital mutilation, FGM. Thank you everyone for coming through. Please subscribe to Proclamation News on Castbox. We're on YouTube as well, same name on YouTube. Just going from part of my module, we usually have Julian Assange sourced in by the UK. I don't actually know that, to be honest with you. Forces. I don't actually know the answer. I don't know the answer to that, buddy. Are you from Iran? You're my granddad's from Pakistan there, sir. So, I support equalities, absolutely. I'm born and bred from UK though. My granddad's from Pakistan. Anyway, page 254. Board of Criminologies and Immigration. This is chapter 8. There has been a growing concern for the rights of women seeking asylum, especially since 1990s when asylum applications were at a high. During the period, the extent of conflict-related sexual violence increased to become a focus for international bodies such as the United Nations. Organisations working with asylum seekers and refugees become increasingly aware that asylum policies and that the system itself did not have a gendered lens, meaning they did not adequately consider the forms of violence that women may be subject to. Likewise, the process did not consider appropriate ways for women as a particular social group to make claims related to sexual violence, extreme domestic violence, or other gendered forms of violence and may lead to leave to remain under humanitarian grounds in 2004. The then UK Board Agency established a policy called Gender Issues in the Asylum Claim, followed up in 2010. This recognised that women who have experienced sexual or domestic violence may have reservations about disclosing sensitive information about instances of abuse. The policy required UK border agency staff to offer a female interviewer and interpreter and highlight forms of violence against women that may be common across many countries. Have found gaps in the way women's cases are handled that can affect their claims as a feminist criminologist. I've found that if women do not disclose sexual violence in the initial interview, but do so later on in the process, the application is likely to be refused. This is particularly complex as women and men may take a long time to build enough trust in the person to disclose intimate violence, as it can be seen as a particularly shameful and stigmatising Canon 2014, looking at the process. The first interview aims to determine an applicant's identity and lodge the asylum claim. To do this, asylum seekers are required to give a brief overview of why they are seeking asylum, although not in any great depth until the substantive or full interview. The number of people seeking asylum in the UK was at the high in the mid-1990s, but decreased over the 10-year period. Those who claim asylum are usually fleeing conflict or persecution, and most applications are male. Gendered nature of asylum can mean that there are gaps in responding to women who apply. The asylum system in the UK is complex and people to move through. Through the Home Office has attempted to address this by introducing a fast-track system. Most applications are refused, although many of these refusals are overturned as appeal and asylum or leave to remain are granted. Welfare restrictions or practices such as dispersal are used as means of controlling asylum seekers. Before I got onto that bit, I did think that, obviously through domestic abuse, domestic violence, women, we get a lot of Caribbeans over here, and I did wonder, it could be because of that. But a lot of them are coming over to pursue a career through university. All different, I'm just saying, all different ethnicities. I've got no problem with it, doesn't bother me. Border criminologies and immigration. Page 256. Free the immigration crisis. Now that you've explored the experience of asylum seekers and refugees, focus will move to looking at the topic of immigration. A term coined by Juliet Stump, referring to state responses to immigration patterns in North America. Stump 2006 argued that both criminal and immigration law are at the core systems of inclusion and exclusion. They are similarly designed to determine whether and how to include individuals as a member of society or exclude them from it. Both create insiders and outsiders. Both are designed to create distinct categories of people: innocent versus guilty, admitted versus excluded, or as some way legal versus illegal. When I say I don't care, I do care about population growth. It has to be controlled, and that means by putting the borders up, so be it, because all our different nationalities here won't be able to live in X amount of years' time. Some main concerns are twofold: that immigration law and policy have been gradually incorporated into criminal law over a number of years, which has meant an increase in crimes related to immigration, thereby swelling the immigrant representation in prison populations. And that routine practices in the US immigration system have become more punitive, such as incorporating mandatory detention. These are valid concerns that can be seen echoed by other commentators. For example, according to the AIS and Bosworth, in Europe alone, rapidly growing foreign populations represent on average 20% of prison inmates, reaching extraordinary highs in the countries such as Switzerland. 71.4%, Luxembourg 68.8%, Cyprus 58.9%, Greece 57.1%, and Belgium 42.2%. Importantly, many of those are imprisoned based on immigration policy or legislation violations, rather than for violent crimes or other offences. Thus, border control policies have significant impacts on the criminalisation of immigrants. Likewise, law and social policy have become increasingly punitive toward immigrants. Looking at the UK as an example, Abbey has shown that while 70 types of immigration offence was passed in the UK from 1905 to 1996, 84 new immigration offences were created from 1997 to 2010. In Zedna 2013, this takes us some way to seeing how the immigration crisis is developing in some other areas of the globe. Rather than dealing with immigration as a matter mainly related to social policy, law has created more ways for immigrants to be taken into criminal justice systems. In this sense, the extent to which justice is served through a criminal justice approach to immigration must be called into question by criminologists and those with an interest in the role of social policies in responding to complex social problems and issues. Social policy also has a wider role in the immigration crisis, in that reductions and stagnations in welfare benefit allowance, for example, can mean asylum seekers live on or below the poverty line. For example, the level of financial support for asylum seekers was frozen for 3 years in the UK from 2011 to 2014. The policy was challenged by the High Court in 2014, and through this challenge it was demonstrated that government policies regarding welfare were pushing asylum seekers into severe poverty. Such barriers to financial support can lead some people who may otherwise not be able to engage in crimes of survival, such as shoplifting or stealing food, or working illegally to gain enough money to live above the poverty line. Therefore, people who may genuinely fear return to their country of origin, but whose claim have been refused. Many continue to live in a country outside immigration rules and regulations, and so can fall into the criminal justice system due to immigration offences. Detaining immigrants. The politics of immigration removal centres. Immigration removal centres, IRCs, named detention centres until 2003, but often still referred to as this, have been a growing area of interest in criminology. One obvious reason is that detention is a form of imprisonment, and since many criminological studies have found prisons to be harmful and detrimental to the health of those confined within them, concerns are raised about the growth in detention populations, particularly across Europe, Australia and North America. Immigration detention differs from most regular forms of imprisonment in that the person detained does not have to be accused or guilty of crime and does not know how long the period of detention will last. Weber 2012. This section explores some wider concerns regarding life in detention, as well as the treatment of people being detained. It is worth beginning our analysis about IRCs by looking to the work of Mary Bosworth, a key criminologist working in the area of immigration control. Her study of IRCs in the UK was the first systematic research project to investigate life in detention centres and include undertaking interviews with asylum seekers. Undocumented migrants are convicted foreign nationals, most of whom were awaiting deportation to their country of origin. She also interviewed the IRC staff and spent 20 months recording field notes in and around the centres. Bosworth points out the political division in opinion on the use of detention for immigrants. For its proponents, immigration detention is a necessary part of the border control. both a right and an obligation of the British sovereign state. Those without visas and immigration status are not entitled to stay, and if they will not go voluntarily, they must be detained to prompt their deportation. For critics, however, immigration removal centres should be abolished. They cause long-term psychological distress, are used in an arbitrary fashion, and are expensive and efficient. Notwithstanding official claims that people are detained only briefly prior to their departure, such opponents point out a growing number of people languish in detention for months and even years. Therefore, the detention of asylum seekers is a highly debated issue. On one side, some argue that governments have the right to detain and then remove those who do it to fit their citizenship or asylum requirements. On the other, commentators argue that removal of liberty is at best a violation of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which states that all people have the right to liberty, and at a worse form of abuse, in and on itself. List some of the key issues that are raised in the debate about the detention of asylum seekers. Some people argue that the numbers of immigrants entering countries, in this case, the nations that make up the United Kingdom, are too high. The economic climate in the aftermath of the global recession has impacted on the number of people able to move away from the UK, while inclusion in the European Union has increased EU migration to the UK. People who support immigration detention often argue that asylum seekers who have had their claims rejected by the Home Office should be detained and then deported, since they are not considered to be fear or persecution on return to their country of origin. On the other hand, sometimes rights of the individuals are not upheld why they are detained or imprisoned without having committed a crime or being found guilty of criminal wrongdoing. Inner confinement can be harmful for many people, including prisoners more generally in the long term. For those working in the field of refugee studies, immigration detention for asylum seekers goes against the principles of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the 1951 Refugee Convention, since it responds to people seeking asylum through criminalisation, rather than treating them as survivors of their persecution. At the same time, serious conflicts such as Afghanistan, Iraq and Syria have increased the need for asylum for many people fleeing violence in these areas. There are a number of appeals that lead to original decisions by the Home Office being overturned, and asylum then being granted. Up to a third of rejections are overturned when appeals are made. Asylum Aid 2011, which calls into question the use of detention and deportation. I mean, there's a lot of war going over Afghanistan, Syria and Iraq, and when they seek asylum, it must be a bit of a problem, obviously, letting them in, because you don't know if they're going to then, if they've been affected by the war, or they could be hiding something to then come and cause that. I really don't know, do you? Quite possibly not. But just thinking from perspective working Home Office, how they look at it. I mean, how would you look at it if someone was in your country in war terrain? Are they affected by the war? Are they that person within the war? You don't know. You're classed as a criminal as such, so to speak, in a crime gesture. Privatisation and IRCs. As Stump 2006 has argued, criminal law and asylum law have gradually merged. Increases in privatisation are mirrored in border controls, including IRCs with some controversial outcomes. Privatisation of state-led facilities, such as prisons and healthcare, has been a concern of criminologists for many decades. Niels Christie, a key thinker in critical criminology, has argued that privatisation allows crime control measures to become an industry where money could be made and contracts are sold to be the highest bidder, thus prompting a made and contracts are sold to the highest bidder, thus promoting a business model by increasing profit and so encouraging interest to target setting. Others have shown that this can be an impact on the quality of care for people depending on or living in, such as institutional facilities, for example. Businesses require facilities to make profit, and as such may find ways to save money in areas such as staffing. In IRCs, this has been found to be detrimental to people living in detention who have complex healthcare needs, as staff may not be on hand at all times to provide appropriate care. Importantly, criminologists are concerned about the use of such agencies, as they are seldom held accountable if and when abuses or problems do occur. Medical justice, for example, reported around 300 allegations of abuse by security staff, including use of excessive force. Medical Justice 2010, the death of Jimmy Mubenga in 2010 at the hands of 3G4S guards led to investigations into use of excessive force and restraint during removal. You know, like you get these people come over from America, don't you? They carry guns. Are they going to be safe when they come here? None of us know. None of us have the answer. Anyway, women in detention. As with other areas of asylum, IRC populations are mostly made up of men. In the UK, out of 10 centres, one, IRC Yarl's Wood, is purpose-built for women and some families. The House and the Cheddars unit have been built for families. The others mostly for or only detain men. This has meant that limited information and research available to those studying asylum detention has, more often than not, focused on men's experiences. However, in Yarl's Wood alone, up to 405 people can be living in detention at any given time, as a number of feminist criminologists have argued in relation to prisons. It is not only the numbers of women in confinement that should be of interest, but the specific experiences and problems that women face during imprisonment or, in the case, detention. The work of women for refugee women helps fill in the gap of knowledge. In 2014, they reported a number of important findings from their research with women who had previously been detained in IRCs in the UK. Mostly in Yarl's Wood. Overall, they interviewed 46 women, 72% of whom said they had been raped as far as a form of prosecution before seeking asylum, and 41% said that they had been tortured. Germer et al. 2004. Survivors of these forms of violence should not be detained, yet all have been subject to detention. 3.4 Children in detention. Another controversial issue in relation to the IRCs of detention of children. People working in the area of children's rights, such as Patricia Hines 2010 in the UK and Edith Montgomery 2008 in Denmark, have highlighted problems in responding to child migrants and unaccompanied minors without due consideration of their age. They have pointed out the immigration policies can at times contravene or do not uphold the United Nations Convention of the Rights of the Child, 1989 for example. Countries that have signed the convention and required to hold the best interest of the child as their top priority should protect their wider rights, including refugee rights, and protect them from all forms of violence. A number of studies have brought the rights of children into question where immigration is concerned. It is useful to recognise at these two key issues the question of age, determination of in asylum, and the treatment of detained children in the UK. As you have seen, not all immigrants or asylum seekers have the identity documentation that is required by border control agencies, such as passports or visas. This can make it difficult to know the person's country of origin, name or even their date of birth. The last issue is impact for deciding how a person's status is approached. That is whether they should be treated as a child or an adult, as whether or not they are seen to be accompanied by parents or they are unaccompanied minors. For example, young people who claim to be children are sometimes disbelieved, especially those who are teenagers. This can affect whether a child will be detained or deported in some countries. In 2010, the UK government promised to end the detention of child migrants based on the evidence given that demonstrated the harms of incarceration, including witnessing violence and racism, attempted suicide and self-harm by children, as well as longer-lasting impacts. Of detention on children's mental health. After they are released, Burnett et al. 2010, organisations such as Medical Justice have long been critics of the immigration of children in detention. In 2010, they reported that many children have been subjected to storm raids, where immigration officers or police entered the home early in the morning to conduct migration raids that led to detention. They found that, while in detention, food was regularly of a poor standard. Schooling was poorer than regular education, and some children experienced violence by parents, other detainees or security guards while in the IRC. Bosworth points out, however, that although detention of children has been officially halted, family units still detain some children. As this section has shown, there are some serious problems linked with immigration removal centres and the issue of detention more broadly. These include abuses against women, children and men seeking asylum, the expansion of detention industries and issues linked with privatisation. AS and Bosworth show these provide good reason for human rights campaigners to be concerned about the treatment of people seeking asylum, particularly in terms of criminalisation. This again draws us back to questions about justice and concerns raised about the increased representation of asylum seekers and immigrants more broadly. In Britain's criminal justice, furthermore, the way in which the asylum seeker itself increasingly minors the criminal justice system remains a site of contention in this area, particularly for critical criminologists. In the summary, changes in policy since the 1990s have made it more difficult for asylum seekers to gain entry to the UK and easier to be processed through the criminal justice system due to increasingly restrictive policies and punitive laws in the area of immigration. Migration policy and practice have gradually shifted towards criminal justice approaches, resulting in the increased criminalisation of immigrants. The use of detention is controversial and strongly debated in immigration politics. It can have serious implications for the rights of migrants, as well as a long-term impact on mental health. This, coupled with issues of privatisation, has made immigration a site of debate in the UK and further afield. In the conclusion, to page 264, border criminologies and crimmigration. This chapter has documented issues in terms of how asylum seekers and immigrants are controlled. It's shown the ways in which this can be done, namely through social policy, increased border security, and through the blend of asylum and criminal law. Key ideas such as Stump's concept of crimmigration have been explored, which gives some way of understanding the wider landscape of these changes. It has been important to consider the impacts and some outcomes of control such as fortress Europe can have on the lives of people fleeing persecution and asylum seeking. Aid to question that the extent to which current approaches achieve the outcome for people in need of help. Many people's lives have been lost trying to gain entry to safer European countries through dangerous overland travel, unsafe migration by sea. For those who reach safer shores, the prospect of detention, dispersal or deportation can leave people feeling depressed but anxious about their future. As you have seen, seeking asylum is a highly debated subject and is often represented in political forums or through the media as a serious problem, particularly in terms of increase of in-net migration. However, it is also clear that applications for asylum in the UK have decreased, particularly because the kinds of controls put in place that make it difficult to reach. As this chapter has shown, the documents not mean fewer people flee conflict or persecution, but that many are deterred from applying for asylum because of the offshore controls, the implementation of key policies such as the Dublin II regulation, and by private border police. All these issues are of great concern to criminologists who are interested in questions of justice and in upholding key legislative principles, such as those which protect human rights, or 1951 Refugee Convention, as well as to those who have shown that detention and incarceration can be particularly harmful for people seeking asylum. So you see all the, you've got principles and you've got critics. They're the principles and the critics on social media. All the critics on social media. Nigel Farage can be one of them sometimes. Saying everyone, you've got legal immigrants coming onto our shores, but they're only going to last on our shores for so long. Unless they're coming in for piracy to steal our resources, which they're not going to get far. They're not going to get far stealing because our police are up on things. We've got CCTV in our city, town and city centres nowadays. We've got community watch as well. But as we see Nigel Farage seeing all them refugees coming in, they're not legal immigrants or whatever you want to call them. They don't last long because they're not coming in. They're not going to seek an asylum. They get put into a detention centre and shipped offshore. Unless they come in and they've got, evidence they've got some sort of skill set that's going to help them into work, perhaps. I don't know. Not so far away finishing the book. Got another one to read after this. How lucky. Before we get back into the politics. It won't take too long. Anyway, conclusion. Noise is increasingly recognised as a problem in the media, in social science and environmental studies, and in government legislation. With the din and cacophony of urban traffic, annoying phone conversations in public places, jet fighters screaming low over remote landscapes, and noisy neighbours, unwanted sound seems to permeate life in both urban areas and the countryside in ways that can sometimes feel impossible to escape. Though it might appear to be a modern problem, the question of unwanted noise is not a new one. In classical Rome, people complained, voiced furiously about the noise made and endless traffic. The sound of the soldiers' hobnail boots on stone cobbles. The shouts of castle drivers, herding animals through the city. The clattering of kitchens and the revels of late night drunks on the street. In Victorian times, it was the street musicians, the rumble of carts and trams, the calls of internet vendors, and the sound of manufacturing that created a disturbance. The experience of sonic environments changes from generation to generation, along with different capacities to make sound. Today, the wider availability of technology results in an unprecedented capacity to make sound both individually and collectively. However, there are other factors in play. First, social life is more complex. More people do more varied things in more places at the same time. In the past in the UK, many, if not most, people got up roughly at the same time, went to work in massy and often socialised together at place of worship or at inns, public houses and in common spaces, sharing both lifestyles and cultural values. Today, life is much more varied and often people have many more choices and different lifestyles and daily routines. Second, the rights of individuals to do so as they please in their own private spaces and to express themselves in public through their lifestyle. Choice, including music and the use of potential noisy technology, result in creation of complex soundscapes in which different priorities, needs, wants, taste and choices coexist, collide and conflict. Managing the soundscape, therefore, seems to be centrally concerned with particular spaces and places and how we use them, rather than just more and bigger technology. Section 1. Sound signatures. This begins by the way people identify with sounds and shows how sounds can define public and private spaces. Think, for example, how specific sounds might come to be identified with an immigration centre, like those described in the previous chapter, and how this would differ from the sounds you would hear within your living room. Section 2. Unwanted sound examines how noise or unwanted sound can be understood as a matter of out of place and how, in turn, sounds can be a source of conflict and controversy. Mapping tranquility turns to question of tranquility to examine how the issues created to the unwanted sound can be sources of inequality. Section 4. Managing unwanted sound considers the ways in which unwanted sound is managed in terms of the right to peace and quiet. This can be understood in terms of environmental and social justice, represented by sound control strategies in zoning and individualization. Page 7273. Sounds and signatures. Public and private places. People often identify strongly with particular types of music, specific artists and performers. Music has become an important way for people to differentiate themselves and express their biography, lifestyles and cultural preferences to show who they are and how they imagine themselves in relation to others. Think of two ways in which sound can be very useful in helping us to create a boundary around people and separate them from either figuratively or symbolically from others. In the discussion, your examples may include some of the following. Sound as a physical boundary. Listen to music through headphones and may physically block out environmental sound as those made up by other people. Sometimes environmental sounds such as waterfalls or fountains are used to create zones of calm in gardens by physically blocking out sound from elsewhere. Some devices, sonic devices such as mosquito, which are designed only to be heard by younger people, are used in public spaces to dissuade them from loitering. Sound as a symbolic boundary. Favourite music, for example, can provide a symbolic boundary suggesting lifestyle choice as well as expressing difference in age, taste, experience and culture. Crowds singing and changing democratic themselves symbolically from other groups and individuals, for example. Music is sometimes used by shops, both to encourage customers in particular social economic groupings and age range, and also to dissuade others. Page 274. Mapping the soundscape. Development of music playing technologies such as MP3 player, and before that, Walkman style portable cassette tape players, has allowed people to carve out a sense of personal space at work, on the streets and at home, in an effort to gain control on their daily experience. As one interview Tracy in sociologist Michael Ball's study of iPod users said, well, I think I've come to the conclusion that overall I feel pretty out of control in my life. Stores play music to get me to buy more. Work tells me what to do and when. Traffic decides how quickly I get from here to there. Even being in public places forces me to endure other people and their habits. The guy slurping his soup, the brat crying for a piece of candy. I didn't realise how much I yearned for control and probably peace and quiet. Strange since I was blasting music in my ears. I think I'm really tired of living on someone else's schedule. The MP3 digital music revolution has given me some control back. Listening to music through headphones has been shown to be a useful way to make a barrier between the distracting background noise of the work environment and the work task in hand. In a study of UK office workers, listening to a personal music appears to be very common. A study in 2010 showed that 77% of British workers listen to music at work. For further their working week on average. On workers in computer-based office environments listen to significantly more music than people in other workplaces. In a study interviewing office workers about listening to music at work, Nicola Diven and Anneli Hake, 2013, found that though some found music distracting, many workers found it helped them to concentrate, as a manager in one's research institute said. For me, there's a certain comfort zone that is created by music, and that blocks out people yakking in the next office and people shouting at each other in the corridor and other people's problems and vehicles arriving outside. It does filter those distractions out. I think it has given me a total control of my overall environment. I find myself concentrating and focused more. Noise can certainly distract you, can't it? Outside the house or inside. Dibben and Hack found that listening to music served other purposes too. For some workers, playing music in their own office marked out this territory as their own private space. For others, wearing headphones symbolised to the rest of the office that they were concentrating and did not want to be disturbed. The researchers also found that there were unwritten rules about who could control the music. In the Research Institute laboratory, they studied there was a common understanding that whoever was spending the most time there in the day would put their music on. On those occasions, when the employees found it hard to compromise, they chose to listen to the radio, as it was perceived a relatively neutral because they did not have any control over the content. Other strategies for managing music played over speakers in shared spaces, including voluntary turning music down or off, negotiating with colleagues or music headphones to block out unwanted music with one's own music. Dibben and Hake, 2003. In these ways, Dibben and Hake found that listening to music in offices formed a material barrier to unwanted sound by wearing headphones and physically blocking out the noise. At the same time, sound was part of a complex office culture with powerful unwritten symbolic meanings which told colleagues, for example, this is my office, I'm busy, do not disturb, and I'm working longest, I can choose the music. Name two sounds you associate with specific places. Why do you remind you of those places? You might have thought of something for personal experience, the sound of a clock ticking in a particular room, or the echo of footsteps across the hard pavement in the town square, or the sound of the sea breaking on a favourite beach. However, you might also have thought of distinctive musical soundtracks to places shared by many people, such as De Janeiro, Liverpool with the Beatles, and other Mersey beat groups. Tibet with the sound of chanting monks and temple bells, and Paris with the sound of accordion playing street musicians, to identify just four well-known examples. Page 276. One important way in which social scientists have begun to engage with people's complex sound worlds that characterise places is through the study of sound spaces, a term coined by Schaefer, 1969, and developed by him with and those involved with the second Soundscapes project within the 1970s. Soundscapes might be defined as the mixture of natural and human-made sound that can be heard within a particular place, environment or landscape. Researchers often make audio recordings of the different sounds that can be heard in a particular place, for example, under a bridge, in an open space, in a city square, or close to large buildings and trees. Sometimes recordings can be made at a particular time in the day. For example, dawn or dusk, to capture the distinctive sounds of animals and birds, or over a period of days or a month to capture the ebb and flow of weather and seasons at particular times of the year. Researchers sometimes translate this information into maps. Such maps try to delineate the define areas which have similar sonic characteristics. Figure 9.1 is one attempt to map the soundscapes on the city of Boston, Massachusetts, in the United States. It is easy to see from the example sound map just how complex and difficult it is to represent sonic environments as a map. Those sounds can be mapped. The nature of the sound makes this very difficult. Sound is characterized by its ability to echo and resound from place to place, to leak out and infiltrate places and spaces far from its source. Though the map is in figure 9.1 presents many problems of source. Through the map of 9.1 presents many problems of understanding and interpretation. One thing that is noticeable is the number of areas marked either with a squiggly spiral or by dotted lines. There are places in which sound has been recorded as ambiguous, where different soundscapes overlap and mix. Though the idea of mapping soundscape is useful, it does not fully take into account the fact there is no single soundscape, even in places that are dominated by particular sounds. Not only are places often characterized by a range of sound producing activities undertaken by different groups of individuals with distinctive aims, aspirations and possibly cultural values, but the very landscape itself is different for particular individual groups. What humans hear above the hubbub and background sound is particularly governed by what is important to them. Sounds are valued differently depending on whom you are and where you come from. Take, for example, the story told by Andrew J. Eisenberg about researching soundscapes in the old town of Mombasa, Einsberg, shows how found forms are fundamental parts of the cultural identity of Muslim population and live in old parts of the city, among its jumbo of narrow streets and historic buildings, he says. I mean, you can sort of distinguish. Maybe at school, we sit in the school class and you hear different people, students come up the corridor. Pretty typical English folk. Flat shoe, heavy shoe, stomp, stomp, stomp. Then you got like a plimsoll. Maybe like the Muslim Asian people wear more like a plimsoll shoe. Lighter shoe, they do. Lighter, comfortable shoe. And ladies, you can hear their shoes, they all come down the corridor with the heels. So yeah, I sort of know where they're coming from with this, the sound. Mombasa, old town, is every day awash, which electrically amplifies male voices delivering Islamic devotional and moral texts in Arabic and Swahili 5 times a day. A polyphony and cantillated Arabic calls to prayer emanates from the rooftop loudspeakers of dozens of neighbourhood mosques. It's soaring, yet mournful, almost languid, harmonic webs, somewhat harshened by the cracking of overstressed or substandard sound reproduction technologies. The constant rhythm of the key sound mark is further punctuated each week by the polyphony of the Arabic and Swahili sermons that emanate from many of these same loudspeakers between these periodic sonic events. A random assemblage of radios, computer speakers in local shops and home supply. The neighbours' private and semi-private spaces with layers of Quranic recitations, sermons in Arabic, Swahili and sometimes English, and religious songs in Swahili and Arabic, producing a continuous merging of vocal performance that are referred to as Islamic soundscape. Eisenberg shows how the cause of Islamic soundscape is an important part of the old town culture, helping to identify its long-established Muslim community as a self-defined urban civilized elite in distinction to Christian groups and poor rural migrants. This latter group are incomers who have been brought to the city as part of the government plan to modernise the city and expand the economy. All these groups are considered barbarian by a long-established old town Muslim community who are proud of their heritage and traditions. The sound of Islamic soundscape resonates out across the city for all to hear. Yet Eisenberg claims that an important attribute of the soundscape is that it is believed to be only for the cause of the Muslim faith community in the old town and demands their attention and participation alone. The word broadcast from minarets and loudspeakers are sacred and private to the community. Eisenberg said that he was made acutely aware of this when he recorded some of the Friday prayers from the balcony of their apartment in which he was staying. Some members of the old town Swahili community called a meeting to discuss possible ways of preventing him from making further recordings. Fortunately, he was able to explain his purely academic interest and the problem was diffused. Eisenberg overlooked the very different interpretations of soundscape, which sounds were culturally important to him. For him as an academic researcher from Europe, broadcast sound belonged to no one in particular. For the Muslim residents of Old Town Mombasa, the broadcast to Friday prayers belonged to them alone, and was an important marker of their community and culture. To try and capture the sound of recording and even to admit to listening to the sound of Friday prayers as an outsider was interpreted by Old Town residents as an invasion of private space. In the summary, sound can create both physical and symbolic boundaries. It can play a role in making individual group and place-specific identities. Anyone been to Turkey? Go to Turkey. Go to Turkey. And you hear the mosques. You hear the mosque, don't you? You hear the mosque go off in the mornings. I love it. I love waking up to, it's like the professional working godly people in, in them countries just praying for saviour, praying for forgiveness. But they're there every morning. You hear them speaking, hear their praying, hear their prayers. It's amazing. Him shouting at the top of their voice. Love it. I love it. I wake up to that. Wish we had a bit more of that in England, really. Remind us who we should be. We should be the capital P and purity, like I always say. Absolutely. Thank you all for coming through. I'm going to finish my reading there. Appreciate it. I hope you can subscribe to my YouTube channel, share it with your friends. We're each and every day we're working hard. Hope you enjoy the show. We do. Thank you for my loyal listeners. Appreciate you all. Take care. Speak soon. God bless.